Hi, 7th grade. This video is going to be a reteach of the bubonic plague. I will be assigning this video on Friday, December 1st. On Monday, I will most likely be pulling quite a bit of you to work on it. I might have you stay after school, so 3:30 to 4:30, because I know that some of us have a hard time finishing at home, and I want to make sure that you guys are all supported in that sense. The first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna go over the actual assessment, so you can see what were the trends, or some of the questions that students got right and wrong, and why they might have gotten it wrong. The first one is the plague started in Asia. How did it make it to Europe? So there was two reasons why it made it to Europe. Let's look at the two wrong answers. There's only two students that picked these. Asian traders wanted to infect European to weaken its power. That is incorrect. Nowhere in the sources, in the discussions that we see people from Asia coming and attacking Europeans and infecting them with the plague. They didn't even know that there was a plague until later. And knowingly or on purpose, Europeans went to Asia and brought it back to Europe. That is also incorrect. They didn't bring it back to Europe as a way to get rid of people. The answer was Mongol invaders brought it to Kaffa, where Europeans were infected. If you remember, Kaffa is let me see if I can find the Kaffa. I can't show you guys what Kaffa is at this moment. Maybe in a map coming up. And then European and Asian traders inadvertently or unknowingly brought the disease to Europe. So most of you guys did really well on this question. So this wasn't necessarily the issue. Remember, the plague is brought from Asia to Europe through trade and also invading armies. But it wasn't like they did it on purpose, right? They didn't know what was causing the plague, so how would they do it on purpose? Which of the following is true about the plague? One person said the virus was carried by rats and transmitted by fleas. The problem with this question is that it wasn't a virus, it was a bacteria. Okay, so that was the issue with that answer. It was known as a bubonic plague. Which of the following is true about the bubonic plague? It was known as a bubonic plague. Okay, but that's a correct answer. I don't know why it was known as a bubonic. It was known as a. That's interesting. It was known as a bubonic plague. Okay. Oh. I just found a mistake here. I found a mistake on my own assessment. It shouldn't be the last option, right? Because this is a mistake. I just realized I made a mistake. It sometimes started with large tumors that grow under the armpit and groin. So all of these are true, but if you caught it, it wasn't a virus. So here I made a mistake where it says virus. It was a bacteria. So most of you guys didn't catch that, so that's okay. All of the above are true, with the exception of this one. But this was only select one option, so you had to pick the last one. Okay, so I apologize for that. How did the Black Death or bubonic plague spread across Europe? So this one is kind of similar to the first one, right? With trade. Rats carrying disease fleas infested Europe's ships going to Europe and homes. One person, so this wasn't a really big issue of a question. This one wasn't a big issue, even though there was a mistake on one of the options. People ate infected grain that came off a cyst. They could have eaten this infected grain, but that's not what gave them the plague. The plague was the fleas, the flea bites. So this came directly from one of the readings that I gave you. Boccaccio was an Italian writer, and he lived through the plague. He lived in the 1300s, and a lot of what we know about the plague came from this man, Boccaccio. And Boccaccio was he was Italian, born in 1313 and died in 1375. So he lived exactly through the bubonic plague. He was an adult. And he wrote, much of what we know about the plague came from this man, Boccaccio. This was one of the vocabulary horrors you should have focused on. So he said that people ate lunch with their friends and dinner with their ancestors. Now, what he's implying is that the plague killed you really quickly. During lunch, you were feeling okay, and at dinner time, you you were dead, eating in heaven with your ancestors. So if you picked ate breakfast and then lunch, you just didn't know this. You just didn't even remember who this person was. You just guessed. The next one seems to be not a. This one seems to. You guys did well with this one. Which of the following about the plague is correct? Caused by Yersinia pestis, and Yersinia pestis is a bacteria. Before I said it was a virus, it's a bacteria. Some of you said it killed 90% of Europeans. That is incorrect. It didn't kill 90%. It killed between 25 and 33% of the population. Right? In some places it was higher, up to maybe 50%, but it was never up to 90%. That's incorrect. Mainly impacted rich people, 3 people said. That is also incorrect. It impacted pretty much everyone equally. I mean, people that were living in the cities probably died more often because there was more trash there was more fleas, there was more trade brings rats, and so forth. It lasted only several months and killed a very small percentage. So 3 people picked that. That is really, really incorrect. There's 2 problems with this. It didn't last several months. It lasted several years. It lasted about 4 or 5 years. And it did not kill a small percentage of the population. It killed about 25 to 30% of the population. So that's why those 2 answers are incorrect. How could people in the 14th century best prevent the spread of the plague? Now, for this one, based on what we know, what could they have done? What could they have done is basic sanitation, being cleaner, right? Because that might get rid of some fleas, maybe some rats. No one said seeing a doctor more, saying praying to God to stop it, and that they did that and it didn't work. By socializing with as many people as they could, why would they do that? Because that wouldn't make sense, because then you're gonna get sick. You might get sick from them because they might have the plague and transmit it to you because they might have the fleas. Okay, this one seemed to be a bit of an issue. You need to know time, right? There's not many dates you need to know in this class. One is 476 for the fall of Rome. The other one is 1347 and 1350. 1347, 48, 49, 50. This is when Europe is in the midst of the bubonic plague. So the 1300s, that's when the plague hit Europe. It started in Sicily. Let me see if I can find this. So if you go here, so the Porto Messina, I believe, is here somewhere. It's by in the Black Sea. It's not shown here. And then it goes from the Black Sea, it goes to Istanbul, it goes down through Athens, and then it finally makes it to Italy. And you see where it says Palermo and Catania? That is Sicily, okay? And the Porto Messina is going to be in Sicily. If I can zoom this out. Nothing's working. There we go. Let's go back to the assessment. What's wrong with this thing? I need a new iPad, guys. That's what I need. There it is. Okay. 1350. So 1347, 48, 49, 50. Okay, what did people think the 1300s? What did they think was causing the bubonic plague? Provide at least 3 answers. An angry God, Jews, some weird lightning on the earth. So those are all good answers. Jews, Muslims, Americans. Someone said Americans. How? This is a 13. That doesn't make any sense, right? America wasn't discovered yet by the Europeans. So how would you say Americans? Some of the things they blame were the air, like air coming out of volcanoes. They blamed Jewish people. They said God was causing it. Those are the 3 main ones you should have focused on. I like how some of you guys expanded on this. Someone said Jews, gods, and flagellants. Now, flagellants were not accused of causing the plague. The flagellants were these people that beat themselves thinking that they had to pay for their sins, and then God would stop sending the plague. For this one, you just needed to know what were some of the reasons that people thought caused the plague. You could not say rats or fleas because they didn't have that knowledge. They didn't know that yet. This one seemed like it was a little harder. for you guys. Let's look at this one. In what ways the Europeans tried to treat the plague? By killing all the rats and fleas? No, that's wrong. And the reason that's wrong is because they didn't know that that was causing it. So why would they do that? By lancing the bubo. A lot of you guys asked me what the word lancing means, and I couldn't respond that because that's part of what you need to know. Lancing means like poking or cutting up the bubo. The bubo is those swellings underneath your arms, your groin, and your armpits. And they will cut it to get the infection out or get whatever was in there out, hoping that that would help by bleeding the patients. Now, a lot of this came from the project that you did, the survival guide, right? By letting the blood out, as much blood out, thinking that the infection might be in the blood, which is correct. But bleeding the patient out wouldn't work. You needed antibiotics, and those weren't invented until hundreds of years later. By taking antibiotics, the Europeans did not know what antibiotics were, right? Antibiotics were not invented until probably the 1900s. So how could they take antibiotics if this is the 1300s? It will be impossible. So that's wrong. Sometimes they will put an egg and excrement on the bubo. Again, this came from the video that I created for you guys. Some of the treatments that they used. They prayed, but that didn't work. And then by taking showers every day to kill the fleas, that's wrong. Because they didn't know that the flea caused it. So why would they do that? So that's why some of these are incorrect. Which of the following are social effects of the plague? So it looks like once we get to these questions, you guys start to struggle, especially the ones that have multiple answers. What happened as a result of the plague? So the cause, the plague. What are the effects? Flagellants whip themselves and harass others. That's one thing that happens, yes. The Catholic Church did not become more powerful. The Catholic Church actually lost power because people lost faith in the church because the church couldn't do anything about this plague. So the church became less powerful because they couldn't fix the plague. And the other reason is because so many priests died that people lost contact with the church, right? Maybe you lived in a manor and there's no more priest. So there's a disconnect between you and the church. You can't, if you're living in the Middle Ages, you probably can't read the Bible. Probably there's no Bible. So there's this loss of clergy members or church officials, and you lose this connection. But the biggest issue was that the church was not able to help people because the church didn't know what was causing it either. Another effect is Jews were persecuted and killed. Most of you guys got that question right. This one, I'm not sure why you didn't pick people abandoned loved ones, right? People were so afraid that they abandoned each other, right? Mom abandoned child, wife abandoned husband, husband abandoned wife, brother abandoned brother. That came from one of the readings that I gave you as well. Lords of the manors developed more power. That is incorrect. The lords of the manors actually lost power. Because remember, the peasants that survived, they want more money. So the lords have to give some of that power to the peasants, give more money to the peasants, give more rights to the peasants. So that's why those two are wrong, okay? On the map, which of the following was infected first in Europe? Now, this one, if I can go back. Now, for this one, this one was this question. If you remember, the plague starts to enter Europe here. From there, it moves through here. And then it moves down. And then it goes left. And then it hits here first. So the answer was D. This is the port of Messina in Sicily. A lot of you picked B because you thought, well, it's closer to here. But that's wrong, right? It starts here, it moves down, and then it enters here. I focus on this a lot in class, and I'm not sure why some of you guys picked this one. Some of you guys picked this one, I don't know why, and then the most wrong answer is this one. This is one of the last places to be infected because remember, the plague moves south, starts in the south, and then moves north. Okay, that's why that answer is wrong. Let's move on. So D. A lot of you guys pick B, and it's incorrect. Again, D is the bottom part. How did the bubonic plague impact the economy of Europe? So here, so when I saw an answer that looked like, when I saw an answer that looked shorts, I automatically knew that it wasn't going to be a full credit answer. Like this one, the bubonic. So the bubonic plague impacted the economy of Europe. One, because so many peasants died. So many peasants died, and the ones that survived were able to demand more higher wages, right? Another thing is, as a result of these higher wages, or as a result of the death of so many peasants, the manor could not be sustained anymore. So the feudalism began to collapse as a result of this plague, because you did not have enough workers that could work the farm, and the ones that survived wanted more pay. So the lord of the manor decided to change things up. So a lot of the land became land to feed animals. It didn't become like a farm anymore. Let's look at some of these answers that you guys picked. The bubonic plague impacted the economy of Europe by wage being higher, so peasants will eat. That's good. There weren't a lot of farmers. Someone talked about things being more expensive. There was inflation. That worked too. Most of you guys did well here. But there's at least, I think there's at least 20 students that need to retake this assessment. Let me go over some of the notes. I'm not gonna go over all of them because I'm not. So here, bubonic plague is a disease that it wasn't new in the 1300s. It had hit Europe in the 500s, I believe. It hit Europe in the 1600s, I believe, again. So it wasn't something new, but it was the 1300s where it had the most devastating effects. Plague transport. That means, how did it get to Europe? So here you have Asia, and then here you have Europe. The question is, how did it get to Europe? And it's mostly through trade. It's mostly through trade. Yes, some invading armies bring the plague to Kaffa, and it's picked up from there too. But it's picked up by traders. Symptoms of the plague. Again, a lot of this comes from your project. If you go back to your project, most of you guys did really well on your project. You could have said, fever. You could have said nausea. You could have said tiredness. And then you could have talked about the more serious effects, like bleeding, the buboes, right? What are the symptoms? How do you know you have the plague? Causes of the plague. The cause of the plague is the bacteria, Yersinia pestis. The cause of the plague is the bacteria, Yersinia pestis, that lives in the gut of the fleas. It can be transmitted to rats. It can be transmitted to other animals, most likely. But it lives in the gut of the flea, and when the flea stings or bites you, I don't know what they do, it gives you a little bit of that disease, and then you develop it. Effects of the plague, social. This means, how did it impact society, right? It impacted society in a tremendous way. Probably the biggest impact was that so many people died, that so many people abandoned each other, that society broke down, right? We have certain things that are valuable to us, like taking care of our family. And that wasn't gonna happen. That wasn't happening because whole families died, and people that survived were too afraid. Religious, right? The church loses power. Jews are killed, right? Muslims are attacked because people are trying to find a scapegoat or trying to find someone to blame. This goes back to this to kind of like the social effect on feudalism, right? Feudalism is already on its last legs, but as a result of the plague, it kind of is given like a death blow, because so many people are dying, and the ones that survive are able to demand higher wages. A lot of people leave the manor and go to the cities to find better employment. Misconceptions of the plague. This is, what did people think was causing the plague? Jews did it. That's what they said. The alignment of the planets. They said the volcano exploded. They said there was earthquakes that released bad air. God did it, right? None of those are correct. The Europeans were hundreds and hundreds of years from really knowing what was causing this, because they didn't have an understanding of like microbiology, cell structure, small organisms like bacteria or viruses. So that's they didn't know any of that. If they had known that, they probably would have been able to fix that, right? They probably would have been able to like clean up better. They probably would have maybe developed antibiotics. But again, that doesn't happen until hundreds and hundreds of years later. So here we have a map of the bubonic plague and where it comes from. It comes from this area, and it's transported. It's transported. Now, again, this is trade. This is trade routes. Like I said, remember how it hits here, then it goes here, and it starts here. That is where it first hits. You have to know where it first hits and when. So it's Southern Europe. Southern Europe is like Italy, and then 1347. It goes from 1347, and 1350 is the year that it kills the most people. By then, most of Europe is infected. Same thing here. So here, the darker areas, 1347. You see 1347? That's where it hits first. A lot of you guys picked this area, right? And that's wrong because look, this is darker here. Let me pick a different color. This is it, and then dark, dark, and dark. So it's this part, Sicily. Okay, it doesn't hit here until I think it's 1349 and at least 1349, and then I don't know what those lines is. 1349 and maybe 1350. Okay. I'm not going to go into this entire text. I'm going to go over the questions. You have this packet with you. You should not have recycled this packet yet because you have not retaken the assessment. But you need to go back and look at this packet. Please don't come back and get some of the questions that are in this packet because you didn't review it. I'm going to go over some of the questions. The first reports of the Black Death came from travelers who came from the East. People that had seen other people in Asia. So some of the travelers, where's that map again? Some of the people that had that had been here, they go back and they talk about it here. They talk about this disease that they noticed in Asia. Okay, so again, it comes from Asia. The Black Death lasted for a few years. Not a few months, a few years. 1347 to the 1350s, okay? Not 20 years. The best second option is 20 years, right? But a few years is a few years, like, 5 or 6. Not many years, not 50 years. The Black Death was spread by germs. The bacteria is a type of germ. It wasn't plants, not chemicals or food. Another name for the Black Death is the plague. The bubonic plague. Once people realized the plague was spreading across Europe, they began to, they didn't call doctors because they didn't really have doctors. They could sleep. They didn't take medicine because there wasn't, what medicine are they going to take? This question is a little weird. They fled. They were like, let's go. Let's get out of here. And that's probably what I would do. The plague killed about 1/4 of the population. In some places it was higher, in some places it might have been lower. It did not kill half of the population. 1/20, that's like 5%, and it did not kill 100%. The carriers of the plague were fleas. Scholars blame the plague on earthquakes and astrology. So people that were like well studied, well informed, they didn't know. The Great Plague. Again, you need to review this packet. Like you can't, I'm not gonna go over every single thing. So I expect you to review this packet. The Great Bubonic Plague is also known as the Black Death because of the black spots that it caused on your body, right? If you start developing these black spots in your groin, in your armpits, in your neck, people knew, oh, you have the Black Death because of these black spotches. The bubonic refers to the bubo. If you remember these things, they call them bubo. Okay. They call those the buboes, and that's where the term bubonic comes from. Again, this is one of the questions that came. So you see how I pull some of the questions from your reading. Boccaccio said that people ate lunch with their friends and then ate dinner with their ancestors in heaven. So this appeared on your assessment. It's like a random thing, but you need to know it. Again, you must know what this. You must review your assessment. The flagellants were troublesome for Europe because they caused a lot of trouble. They attacked people. They beat themselves up. They attacked other Christians. They attacked Jews. They attacked Muslims because they thought that by doing so, God would stop this plague. How did the plague transform Europe? We talked about that already. The Great Plague. Again, you need to know where it starts, right? It starts here. It doesn't start there, but it enters Europe through here. This color needs to. Okay, those arrows represent when it hit Europe. What we talked about this already. Why was it known as the Black Death? What does bubonic refer to? The bubo. We talked about the lunch. I think this is the same question as before. The plague originated in Asia. What were some of the symptoms? I will ask you again. What were some of the symptoms of the bubonic plague? How did people know they had the plague? Why was the plague so difficult to treat? Because people didn't know what was causing it. You can't treat something that you don't know what's causing it. Europeans, a lot of Europeans, Jews were killed because people blamed them for starting the plague. They said that they had poisoned the wells. And some Jews confessed that they had done it, but not because they had done it, because they didn't, but because if they confessed, they figured, you might leave me alone, okay? Jews were really blamed for the plague because a lot of them had been successful, and people wanted to take advantage of that. Here are some statistics of where the plague was worse and least worst. For example, in Scotland, only 20%. In some places, it was up to 37%, like France. Again, this is the decline in Europe population. According to says where the plague began. Again, a lot of these questions have to do with where did it start, what is it, and what are the effects of the plague. You need to know causes of the plague, what causes it, and then what are the effects of the plague? What happens as a result of the plague? Think of people dying. Think of power of the church. Think of how it impacts Muslims, Jews, other Christians. Think of flagellants. Causes, think of obviously the trade, rats, fleas, dirty conditions of Europe. And then also the symptoms. What are some of the things that people experience as a result of the plague? How many people died as a result of the plague? How did this change Europe? Boccaccio appears again. I'm not gonna ask you the order of the plague. Let me see if I have I can show you guys a video. Hopefully it's not restricted. Let's try this one. Hopefully it's not restricted.
Construction elsewhere. Before the In October of 1347, 12 ships dropped anchor at a Sicilian port. Those who eagerly approached were met with a grisly sight. Almost all aboard were either dead or barely alive, their skin erupting with blackened boils that dripped pus and blood.
So that's where the plague name comes from, the Black Death.
Horror, the Sicilian authorities demanded that the ship set sail, but though they left, the damage had already been done. The Black Death was now.
So they didn't allow him to stay for long. They were like, you guys gotta leave. But by then, the fleas had infected other people by then.
In Europe, and millions would die in what is considered one of the greatest disasters in history. Let's explore how the bubonic plague wiped out at least a third of Europe's population, if not more.
So that's a third. A third is about 33%.
This episode of the Infographic Show, what made the Black Death so deadly? Europe was hit hard by the plague, but it was not hit first. It was also not unaware of a disease that was already bringing widespread death and destruction elsewhere.
So they were not unaware because travelers had already brought this news, right? So they knew that something might be coming.
Before the infested ships arrived in Sicily, rumors of a frightful sickness devastating the populations of first China and then India, Egypt, Persia, and Syria had spread near and far. While no one knew what caused it or why, it seemed to follow trade routes spanning the Near and Far East. Further, when it appeared, it was by all accounts unstoppable. Those struck by the Black Death would begin to swell at the lymph nodes located in their groin area or underarm regions. The growths would soon develop into large blackish-blue egg-sized lumps, or for the even less fortunate, expand to the size of apples. These would then fester and ooze various bodily fluids. Beyond this, those with the disease could develop any combination of a series of additional symptoms. These included fever, pain, chills, sweating, upset stomach, and diarrhea.
So these are the symptoms of the plague.
Almost always, this was followed by death, according to those who observed its effects.
So they're showing this guy with the plague mask. Again, this doesn't happen until later. This is a misconception.
Firsthand, all it appeared to take was a brief physical contact with the clothing of someone who was sick to pass the disease onto another. Though some doctors claimed that it was the spirit leaving the body of the deceased that infected others as it passed by. Obviously, at this point in history, the real methods of disease transmission were not yet well understood. Without understanding it, most were helpless to defend against it. Few areas other than some islands cut off from the rest of Europe by the sea made it through the pandemic plague-free. The rest of the population was not so lucky. The bacterium infiltrated virtually every European city's defenses, and many who appeared perfectly healthy one day could be dead a few days later. It was uncommon, though possible, for someone to survive a week or two before he or she died. Compounding problems further, those with the disease would typically be asymptomatic for the first few days, and so
asymptomatic means they don't have symptoms.
No one would be aware that they had caught it. This meant that successfully isolating them from the rest of society at this point was all but impossible.
So, for example, what they mean by that is that if you're asymptomatic but you have the disease, you could have this disease that you're carrying around, and you have these fleas, and you're walking around people that don't have it, and then you give it to them. Like, not give it to them, but you pass on the fleas. You pass on the disease. Because you're not isolating, because you don't know. It's kind of like if you have COVID, but you don't have any symptoms, and then you go around and talk to people and interact with people, and you're giving it to them because you don't know that you have the disease, but you don't have symptoms yet.
Those who tried the next best thing to protect themselves by fleeing for the country were not safe there either. The plague decimated livestock as well, and countless pigs, cows, chickens, goats, and sheep.
So it impacted not just humans, it impacted the animals as well,
who also died a brutal death. This was such a problem that it led to a shortage of wool throughout the continent. While many European areas had a death figure of around 30%, 90% of the Italian city of Florence perished. Sometimes bodies of the deceased remained where they had died, as there were not enough people still living to bury them. Thousands of French villages, in addition to areas in other locations, were left without a single remaining soul. The Black Death had mercilessly transformed them into ghost towns. In some instances, nature eventually took over, and areas that people once called home were reclaimed by surrounding forest. It took aerial photography following the end of World War I to rediscover these locations as places where men, women, and children once lived. Most estimates place Europe's death toll between 50 and 70 million, or around 30-some%, though the CDC claims it killed as much as 60% of the population, which is considerably more. Worldwide estimates typically range from 155 to 200 million. The world at the time was a mere 500 million people, so nearly half of all its inhabitants, or again, according to some sources, even more, were killed. So how was it that the Black Death was able to spread so quickly and wipe out so many, people and animals alike? Well, for one, as previously mentioned, there was little in the way of scientific knowledge in the 1300s. Not only did people not understand the plague's causes or modes of transmission, but there were also countless failures in how those in the medical field attempted to treat it. It is true that Yersinia pestis, the bacterium behind the Black Death, or bubonic plague, is highly contagious. It can also be spread in many ways, though obviously contaminated spirits aren't one of them. Many believe that in its later stages it had the ability to morph into
These are the later stages.
airborne strain that could be passed on to a new host via a simple sneeze or cough. However, all strains airborne, or those in the more initial stages that are not, are believed to have been transferred through a flea or lice bite, and many animals, in addition to countryside livestock, serve as hosts for the bacterium and blood-sucking pests. Example.
It's Michael's big holiday sale. Get up to 50% off holiday must-haves for every room and budget.
Examples are things like squirrels, rabbits, chipmunks, and mice. However, many in the scientific field have argued that by far the worst contributor to the spread of the Black Death was the urban rat and its flea. Part of the reason for this belief is that rats have been observed to develop symptoms quite similar to those in people, and in cases of a modern-day
So the rat also was infected, and the rat would develop these same symptoms.
plague, many people with the sickness had accompanying bites from fleas. Recent outbreaks often follow what's known as rat falls as well, or where rodents die off in record amounts for whatever reason. Thus, the most prevalent theory is that the Black Death all began when rats with the plague died, and their fleas then looked for more blood in another readily available source, which would at times be human. Upon being bitten by the contaminated flea, this person would then be exposed to the deadly bacteria. Seemingly in support of this theory, ships during the mid-1300s were commonly infested with the furry rodents who thrived in their dark, moist environment. And following the death ship's arrival in Sicily, the plague continued to spread further, following a trade route pattern, as it had previously in Asia, to other port locations throughout Europe and as far down as North Africa. However, more recently, there have been some proposed tweaks to this rat-based theory. As we just mentioned, the Black Death, after all, is not the only outbreak of the plague in the world's history. There have been outbreaks before as well as after, and those that took place more recently followed a different pattern entirely. Europe's Black Death spread much faster, and as far as historical records are concerned, there was no mention of a mass rat die-off in the days or months preceding it. Now, some scientists suggest that it was human fleas and lice that were the true culprits behind Europe's version of the disease. In this case, fleas would bite infected people and then move on to others one by one who happened to be in their nearby vicinity.
So people are saying it could have just been the flea that's carried by people, but the point is that the flea is like a common denominator.
They describe the underlying mathematical model that a rat flea spread follows is quite different from a human flea or lice one, and when information is plugged into simulations, the human flea model more closely matched data from 7 of 9 plague-hit European cities. Those with this newest evidence admit that the Black Death may not have been causing mass devastation all by itself. When victims' bodies were exhumed from mass graves in England, anthrax spores were also discovered along with them. If anthrax made people extra susceptible or spread it further unintentionally, form of treatment, which was just how it sounds. While Washington awoke with a sore throat and King Charles suffered a seizure, following bloodletting treatment, both died shortly thereafter.
So bloodletting. So it's some of the things that they did to try to cure the plague.
after. Boil lancing was another technique used as a form of treatment, which was just how it sounds. Someone would essentially lance or stick a pointy object into the boils to drain them of their gooey contents. If this wasn't done, they would only continue to grow larger and, in time, poison their host due to the mass buildup of dead blood and pus. Then again, popping them could also cause death due to toxic shock. Beyond the patient likely dying, the boils contain highly contagious matter and possibly spread the disease yet further. Other methods such as burning of various herbs or immersing the sick in vinegar or rose water were also, unsurprisingly, ineffective. In time, after failure upon failure and in an attempt at self-preservation, many doctors simply stopped accepting patients. Even priests began refusing to perform last rites out of danger for their own safety. Where men failed, nature did little to help either. Not only did people have little idea of how to handle the plague, but they were genetically prone to succumbing to it. Studies of the remains of the European population at the time determined that only 0.2%.
We'll stop here. You need to get 75% on this video. I do expect that you review your packets. Your assessment is going to happen probably next, like the week of when you come back on Monday. Today's the 1st, so 2nd, 3rd, 4th, the week of the 4th. I can give you the retake on Monday or Tuesday, but Friday will be the last day. Best of luck.